The memory of that night is still sharp in my mind, like glass pressed against skin. It was supposed to be one of the happiest evenings of our lives, my son's wedding reception. A night filled with music, lights, and laughter. The ballroom shimmered with golden chandeliers. The band played upbeat jazz, and everywhere I turned, people were clinking glasses, hugging, dancing. Everyone looked so alive, so radiant. Everyone but me. I stood alone near the edge of the room, tucked against a wall like some forgotten piece of decoration. I had dressed carefully that evening, in a soft blue gown that matched my eyes, with the pearl necklace my late husband gave me on our 10th anniversary. I thought I looked elegant, proud, ready to be introduced as the mother of the groom. Instead, it was as if I were invisible. What made it unbearable wasn't just being ignored. It was how intentional it all felt. When the announcements were made, when names were read aloud, mine was skipped over, replaced by polished words about new beginnings and family moving forward. I felt my stomach drop as I realized there would be no mention of me. No acknowledgement of the years I had poured into raising my son. The countless sacrifices I had made to bring us here. I remember standing there with my hands clasped tightly, smiling on the outside while my heart cracked in two. The laughter around me only sharpened the ache. Guests passed by without even glancing in my direction, swept up in the celebration orchestrated by the new bride and her family. At one point, I caught my son's eye across the room. For a fleeting second, I thought he might walk toward me, pull me into the light, remind everyone who had stood by his side long before this glamorous evening. But he turned away, pulled by another toast, another photograph, another life that seemed to no longer include me. Shock held me first, cold and numbing. Then heartbreak crept in, heavy and suffocating. But beneath it all, something else began to stir, something that burned hotter with every passing minute. Quiet anger, not the kind that lashes out, but the kind that smolders deep in the chest. Waiting, I realized, standing there under those glittering chandeliers, that I was being erased in real time. They thought I would fade into the shadows, that my silence meant surrender. But I was not finished, not by a long shot. This was only the beginning, and to understand how I reached that moment, you'd have to know the story of everything I gave up to bring us here. When I think back to the years that shaped me, I don't picture ballrooms or champagne toasts. I picture small kitchens with peeling wallpaper, late nights at the dining table covered in bills, and a little boy asleep with his head on my lap while I worked by the glow of a single lamp. My husband passed far too soon, leaving me with a young child and a mountain of responsibility. There were nights I cried quietly into my pillow so he wouldn't hear, wondering how I would make ends meet. But every morning, I rose, packed lunches, ironed shirts, and promised myself that he would never feel the absence of stability, even if I carried the weight alone. I built my business the only way I knew how, one small step at a time. At first, it was design work done at the kitchen table, scraps of fabric and swatches stacked in neat piles while I balanced the checkbook in my head. I took on projects that no one else wanted, long hours in other people's homes, repairing, rearranging, making something beautiful out of very little. Slowly, through persistence and reputation, it grew. The business became not just my livelihood, but my anchor. Every late night, every new client, every risk I took was not for me, it was for my son. I remember the way his eyes lit up the first time he realized I had my own office. How proud he looked when he told his teacher that his mom ran a company. Those memories warm me still. I wanted him to know that even in loss, we could rise. That even when the world felt cruel, love and determination could carve a path forward. But woven into that pride is something else now. A quiet regret that the years of sacrifice became invisible over time. That the late nights, the skipped meals, the birthdays spent balancing work and motherhood somehow became the backdrop rather than the story. I told myself it was worth it, that one day he would see, and yet, standing in that glittering ballroom on his wedding night, erased as though I had never mattered, I felt the sting of truth. My sacrifices had built the foundation he stood on, but in the eyes of his new wife, and perhaps even in his own, I had already become replaceable. At first, I told myself it was normal. A new wife wanting to make her mark, to create her own traditions. I tried to step back gracefully, to give them space. But what began as small adjustments soon revealed itself as something sharper, an intentional effort to move me out of the frame. It started with the business. My design firm had been my life's work. The thing that kept a roof over our heads and food on the table when times were hard. After the wedding, my daughter-in-law suggested freshening things up. I thought she meant a new logo, maybe a modern website. Instead, she slowly pushed me out of the brand itself. The company name that had carried my family for years was shortened, polished, stripped of my identity. My photo disappeared from the website. Clients I had nurtured for decades suddenly received emails from her. Not me. Social events told the same story. Family gatherings that I had always hosted were now held at their home, with guest lists that excluded old friends of mine. Holidays became rehearsed performances of her recipes, her decorations, her voice filling the air while mine was drowned out. Even when I was present, it felt as though I had been relegated to the role of a polite visitor. There were subtler moments, too. The way she'd laugh lightly when I offered advice, brushing it off as outdated. The times she'd forget to mention important decisions until they were already made. The way she referred to the business as ours when speaking to others, yet never once included me in the credit. I began to notice patterns, small erasures adding up to something larger, a careful redrawing of lines that placed me outside. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself that maybe this was how families changed, how the old gave way to the new. But each quiet dismissal, each missing invitation, each sidelong smile cut deeper. I realized with a sinking heart that this wasn't simply about creating space for herself. It was about replacing me altogether. The frustration grew inside me, no longer quiet, no longer easy to swallow. It wasn't just about a business, or even about traditions. It was about being treated as though my years of struggle and sacrifice had expired, as though I had outlived my usefulness. What she didn't know, what none of them realized, was that I still held power. I had not survived all those years of hardship to be erased so easily, and soon I would remind them exactly who I was. What they never realized is that while I allowed them to believe they were taking control, I never actually handed them the keys. My years in business had taught me one thing: above all else, never surrender leverage. Not even to family, especially not to family. Quietly, I had kept every important document under my name. The accounts, the contracts, the legal filings, they all still traced back to me. I let them pose for photographs, make speeches, and smile for clients as though the empire were theirs. All the while, I held the pen that signed the checks, the password that unlocked the funds, the authority that made the decisions binding. The moment I knew they were ready to erase me completely, I decided it was time to remind them who built the foundation they stood on. With steady hands, I picked up the phone and called my attorney. I spoke clearly, almost serenely, instructing him to revoke authorizations and reroute accounts. Then, I reached out to one of our largest partners, a multi-million-dollar deal they had been boasting about for weeks, and ended it with a single call. It was remarkable, really, how quickly the tide turned. One conversation, one signature, and the project they had been promising to investors evaporated into thin air. I could almost picture the panic on their faces when the news reached them. They thought they were playing chess with me, moving pieces while I stood frozen. But what they hadn't considered was that I still owned the board. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. Not bitterness, not rage, but calm assurance. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they revealed exactly how little they understood me. I had not clawed my way out of grief and hardship to let someone else write me out of my own story. As I set down the phone, a quiet smile formed on my lips. The pieces were finally back in my hands, right where they belonged. And though victory felt satisfying, a wave of reflection followed, because beneath the power, there was still the ache of what had been lost, the bond I once believed unshakable. After the rush of reclaiming control, the quiet of my house felt almost unbearable. The silence pressed against me, heavier than I expected. With no phone calls to make and no signatures to deliver, I sat alone in the dim light of my living room, surrounded by framed photographs that told stories of a different time. My eyes lingered on one picture in particular, my son at 10 years old, standing proudly with a science fair ribbon pinned to his shirt. His smile was wide, his cheeks flushed with excitement, and I remembered how he had looked at me that day, like I was the person who made all things possible. In his eyes, I wasn't just his mother. I was his anchor, his champion, his safe place. Those years came rushing back with painful clarity. The nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the afternoons spent on the bleachers, cheering through rain and cold at his baseball games. The small victories we celebrated together, just the two of us, when money was tight, but love filled the gaps. I had given everything I had, piece by piece, to make sure he knew he was never alone. Now, that closeness felt like a memory from another life. The man who once looked at me with pride now barely acknowledged me in a crowded room. The boy who once reached for my hand had learned to turn his back. And what cut deepest was not just the betrayal itself, but the realization that perhaps he no longer remembered the woman who had carried him through storms. Loneliness settled into my bones, and for a moment, I felt tired of fighting, tired of proving my worth, tired of being invisible in the very life I had built. I told myself maybe this was simply the way things go, that mothers fade as new families take center stage. But even as that thought flickered through my mind, another stirred quietly beneath it, a whisper reminding me that resignation was not in my nature. Not yet. The heaviness of memory lingered, but it didn't last long. I have never been the kind of woman to sit in sorrow for too long. The ache of loneliness slowly hardened into resolve, and before the night was over, I knew exactly what I had to do. If they wanted a game of power, they were about to learn that I had been playing far longer than they had even been watching. I pulled the old lockbox from the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were documents that told the real story of the empire they thought belonged to them: business contracts, deeds, insurance policies, and power of attorney papers that bore only my name. I spread them across the dining table, page after page, the proof that I still held the reins. The next morning, I called the people who had never failed me: my attorney, my accountant, the partners who had built their reputations on trust and fairness. Each call was deliberate, calm, measured. I explained what needed to be done: assets transferred, authorizations revoked, protections set in place. Their voices carried respect, even admiration, as if they had been waiting for me to make this move. As the hours passed, my house filled with the quiet hum of preparation. Files were scanned, signatures couriered, meetings scheduled. Every step was another stone laid in the foundation of my defense. And beneath the steady rhythm of paperwork and planning, I felt something I hadn't in months control. I imagined the looks on their faces when they realized the empire they paraded as their own was slipping through their fingers. I pictured the silence that would fall when I revealed the truth, the undeniable evidence that I was not the weak, invisible woman they believed me to be. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across my table of documents, the suspense inside me had transformed into anticipation. I was no longer just surviving their schemes. I was preparing to end them. This wasn't about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and the legacy I had built with my own hands. And when the moment came, I would stand firm, unshaken, ready to deliver the truth they had tried so hard to bury. The stage was set. All that remained was the confrontation itself. The day of the confrontation arrived quietly. As most storms do before they break, they invited me to dinner at their home, presenting it as a family evening. But I knew better. This wasn't about food or company. It was about finishing what they thought they had already won. I sat at their polished table, the scent of roast chicken and rosemary filling the air. They smiled too wide, their laughter ringing hollow. My son spoke first, his tone careful but brimming with pride. He told me how the business was moving forward under new leadership, how investors were eager, how the future looked brighter than ever. Beside him, his wife chimed in with rehearsed enthusiasm, painting pictures of expansion, rebranding, a modern empire with them at the helm. I listened patiently, nodding as though their words carried weight. But inside, I felt the calm of a woman holding cards no one else could see. When they finished, I folded my hands in my lap and spoke gently. I told them I was happy they felt confident, that their vision was bold. Then I asked if they had spoken to our largest partner that morning. Their faces faltered. I explained, still in that same even tone, that the multi-million-dollar deal they had been counting on had been canceled by me. The room shifted in an instant. Their confidence cracked like porcelain dropped on tile. My son's jaw tightened. His wife's eyes darted toward him, searching for reassurance. But I wasn't done. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. Inside were the documents: revoked authorizations, transferred accounts, proof that every ounce of control still belonged to me. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I could almost hear their thoughts scrambling, clawing for excuses that would not come. My son stammered something about misunderstanding, about how this wasn't what they had planned. His wife went pale. The smile wiped clean from her face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My calm was more powerful than their panic. I explained, slowly and deliberately, that I had seen through their scheme from the beginning, that every step they took to erase me had only confirmed what I already knew, and that tonight, they were learning the most important lesson of all: you cannot steal from someone who still holds the keys. The weight of my words hung in the air, unchallenged. They had nothing left to say. For the first time in a long while, I was the one commanding the room. And in that silence, thick, stunned, undeniable, I found my dignity again. When I look back now, I see more than just betrayal. I see the long road that carried me from grief to strength, from invisibility to power. For so long, I believed my worth lived only in the sacrifices I made for others: long nights at the office, years of raising a child alone, the quiet endurance of loneliness. I thought that love meant giving without limit, even if it meant fading into the background. But standing in that silence, watching their confidence collapse, I realized something I should have known long ago. My worth was never theirs to define. Respect isn't given as charity, and it doesn't come with titles or applause. It is earned, and it must also be demanded when others try to take it away. The days that followed were strangely calm. I woke each morning without the weight of their manipulations pressing down on me. I walked through my home with a new steadiness, no longer wondering if I would be pushed aside. For the first time in years, the air felt lighter, as though the walls themselves acknowledged that I had reclaimed them. Of course, there is sadness that lingers. I miss the boy my son once was, the boy who looked at me with pride, the boy who believed in me before he believed in anyone else. I can't pretend that loss doesn't ache, but I've come to accept that life often asks us to let go of what no longer serves us, even if it hurts. What matters most is that I did not let his choices destroy me. Instead, I chose to begin again. I poured my energy back into myself, my work, my friendships, the quiet joys I had neglected. And in doing so, I discovered that dignity isn't something you wait for others to give back. It's something you claim, quietly and firmly, one choice at a time. So, what have I learned? That being kind does not mean being weak. That sacrifices matter, but they should never erase your own identity. And that when people try to write you out of your own story, you always have the right, the obligation to pick up the pen again. To anyone listening who has ever felt overlooked or erased, I want you to remember this. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and your worth is not negotiable. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if my story resonated with you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts. Leave a comment. Let me know if you've ever faced something similar. And if you believe in standing up for your worth, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Together, we remind each other that dignity, once reclaimed, can never again be taken.